Ever crack open a history book and kind of feel like you're staring into, I don't know, the abyss? Today, we're plunging headfirst into one of those, weighty, world-changing documents, the European Convention on Human Rights.
And it's way more relevant than you might think. We're not just talking about some dusty old agreement here. This thing is the bedrock of human rights in Europe. Its impact, global,
Okay,
serious.
so zooming out for a sec, big picture. What is it about the ECHR that makes it so, I don't know, impactful?
Okay, so picture this. A world still reeling from World War II, haunted by atrocities, right? And
Yeah.
on top of that, facing the very real threat of totalitarian regimes. That's the crucible the ECHR was born in. It was this like bold attempt to safeguard individual freedoms, but at the same time, trying to make sure you still had a stable democratic society.
Yeah, and our source material, that Wikipedia article on the ECHR, it really underlines that historical tension, right? It's not just about saying, hey, no more Holocaust. It's about building a firewall against tyranny, all forms.
Exactly. And that's reflected throughout the whole document. Take Article 2, for example, the right to life. That's not just some, philosophical statement. That article has directly shaped laws on capital punishment, even euthanasia across Europe.
Wow, so we're talking about more than just words on paper here. This is a living, breathing document, like shaping legal realities.
100%.
Yeah.
And get this, the people who actually sat down and drafted this thing, not just some, ivory tower academics, this Wikipedia article, it actually mentions Winston Churchill himself. He was involved in the early stages.
No way.
Yeah, and a key figure in actually getting the text down, Sir David Maxwell Fyfe.
Wait, Maxwell Fyfe, wasn't he a prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials? Talk about a front row seat to the consequences of human rights abuses.
Exactly. He saw firsthand what happens when international law fails. And that experience, that fueled his passion for putting together a document with some real teeth.
Okay, so we've got this backdrop of war, this looming Cold War, and these seriously heavy-hitting historical figures pushing for this thing. So what were they hoping to accomplish? What were the core aims driving the creation of the ECHR?
At its heart, it was about creating this safety net for fundamental human rights. The ECHR lays out this whole range of rights. And the idea is that every individual, doesn't matter your nationality, should be entitled to those rights within a democratic society.
So it sounds like they laid out these super important rights, but didn't they know that in the real world, sticking to those rights all the time could get kind of tricky?
Yeah, you're spot on. And that's where this whole idea of derogation comes in, right? It's right there in Article
Mm.
15. Basically, it says that in certain really specific situations, states, they can actually, temporarily step back from certain rights.
Okay, hold on. What kind of situations are we even talking about here?
Think like a major, major threat to a whole nation, like if a war breaks out,
Right.
or, widespread terrorism, or even like a natural disaster, but like one that totally overwhelms a country's resources. But even then, Article 15, it's got some pretty serious safeguards built in.
So it's not like governments get this blank check to just go around and do whatever they want.
No, no, not at all.
Yeah.
The ECHR, it's very clear that anytime you have a derogation, it's got to be strictly necessary and proportionate. It's got to match the threat. And even then, even in those extreme situations, some rights are just completely off limits. You can't touch them. Core rights, the prohibition of torture, that's non-derogable, no matter what.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense. Can't just throw out the whole rule book just because things are getting a little, dicey. But I'm guessing this whole derogation thing, it's been tested over the years, right?
Oh, yeah. Are you kidding? And one of the biggest, most significant cases, it involved the UK right after the 9/11 attacks.
Oh.
Yeah, they tried to derogate from Article 5, the one that guarantees the right to liberty and security. They wanted to detain suspected terrorists without a trial.
Whoa. So what happened? The European Court of Human Rights, did they uphold that?
They did not. Nope. The court, they ruled that, okay, yeah, the threat, it was real, but the UK's measures,
Yeah.
too broad. The court said they didn't meet that, strict necessity bar. They went too far.
Wow, that's incredible. So even with something as horrifying as 9/11, the ECHR, it still held the line. They basically said, look, you can't just suspend fundamental rights without a really, really good reason.
Exactly. And that right there, that's a testament to just how powerful this document really is. It's meant to be this bulwark against governments overreaching, even when things are really, really tough.
Okay, so we've talked about situations where rights, maybe they get limited, but what about the actual rights themselves? What are some of the key articles spelled out in the ECHR?
Well, we already touched on Article 2, right, the right to life. But there's a whole bunch more. Article 3, for example, That one prohibits torture and inhuman or degrading treatment.
Yeah, that one seems pretty straightforward.
You'd think so, right.
Right.
But believe it or not, that article, it's been used to challenge all kinds of stuff. We're talking everything from prison conditions to, get this, specific interrogation techniques.
Really?
Oh, yeah. There was this, landmark case, right? The European Court of Human Rights, they ruled that some interrogation methods, ones that a member state was using, they said, nope, those cross the line. Those amount to inhuman treatment, even though technically they didn't quite fit the, traditional definition of torture.
Wow, that's wild. It shows how the ECHR it can be used to address these really specific situations and how its interpretation evolves over time as our understanding of human rights changes.
It's true. It's not just some static document, right? It's a
Yay.
living, breathing instrument. It shapes how we understand and, how we uphold human dignity.
Okay, what other articles are must-knows? The Wikipedia article, I think it mentioned Article 8. Something about the right to respect for private and family life.
Right, right. Article 8. And that one, that one gets really interesting because it covers this huge range of issues. Like, we're talking data protection and surveillance, family law, even sexual orientation.
Wow.
Yeah, so in our modern world, with everyone worried about online privacy, data collection, all that, that article is more relevant than ever.
No kidding.
Not even. The European Court of Human Rights, they've had to figure out how to apply this right to things like government surveillance programs, facial recognition technology. It's always evolving.
This is making me think about something you mentioned earlier, the margin of appreciation. Can you maybe break that down a little?
Yeah, totally. Basically, it means that the European Court of Human Rights, they get it. They understand that different countries, they have different cultures, different social contexts. So yeah, the ECHR, it lays out these fundamental rights, but there's a little bit of wiggle room. The ECHR gives states some leeway in how they actually interpret and implement those rights, but within their own legal systems, of course.
So it's not like a one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. The court, they're going to look at the specifics of a case, right? And they're going to factor in how much margin of appreciation a state gets on that particular issue.
Gotcha. Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's stick with the whole right to privacy and family life, right? So even though the ECHR, it protects these rights, there have been cases where the court was like, you know what? We're going to give states a little more leeway here, specifically when it comes to areas like, family law, especially when you get into issues that have this strong moral or religious dimension.
Interesting. So even with something as fundamental as the right to privacy, there's still these nuances in how it gets applied. Like the ECHR, it recognizes that cultural norms and legal traditions, they're not the same everywhere.
Right. It's about this balancing act, protecting individual rights, but also respecting how diverse European societies actually are.
This reminds me of something else from that Wikipedia article, the protocols.
Oh, yeah, the protocols. Think of them like, updates or amendments to the original convention. They often address these issues that back in 1950, they weren't really on anyone's radar.
So it's a way for the ECHR to stay current, keep up with the times.
Exactly. And some of these protocols, pretty major. Protocol 12, for example, that one trying to really broaden the convention's reach. The goal was to cover discrimination for any legal right.
So it's they're adding updates, right? Like adding updates to an app to make sure it still works.
Yeah. That's a really good way to think about it. But you know how it is with software updates, right? Sometimes they go smoothly and sometimes, they cause a little friction. Protocol 12, yeah, it definitely sparked some, let's call it spirited debate.
Really? Why is that? I mean, it seems like a good thing, trying to, make protections against discrimination even stronger.
On the surface, yeah, totally. But the thing is, the way they wrote Protocol 12, it's pretty broad. Some countries, they got worried. They were saying it could lead to tons of lawsuits, and that it might start to blur the lines between what's actually discrimination and what's not.
Oh, I see. So it's another one of those balancing acts, right? Trying to make sure that you're upholding people's rights, but also trying to avoid any unintended consequences.
Exactly. And it just goes to show, right, the ECHR, it's constantly evolving. And not just because of, court decisions, but also because of these protocols. They reflect how societal values change and how legal challenges they change too.
This deep dive into the ECHR, this has been, wow, really eye-opening. We covered so much. I mean, we talked about its origins, right after World War II, and then how it's shaping legal issues that are happening right now. So for you, what's the most important takeaway?
I think it's so important for people to remember this. The ECHR, it's not just some abstract document. It has real power.
Hmm.
It's a tool, a powerful one, that everyday people, they can use it to seek justice, to hold their governments accountable, to make sure they're actually upholding fundamental rights.
Yeah, we've seen that firsthand through all the examples we've talked about today, how these specific articles, they've actually led to changes, like in actual laws and policies across Europe. It's impacted everything. Prison conditions, surveillance, discrimination, you name it.
Exactly. So as we move into this, future, it's only getting more complex,
Yeah.
right? We've got new technologies, global issues, social norms that are constantly changing. Well, the ECHR, it's going to remain a vital framework. It's how we're going to navigate all that complexity and at the same time, hopefully, safeguard human dignity.
It really makes you think, like, how would the ECHR's principles apply to something like artificial intelligence? Where is the line when it comes to privacy and surveillance in a world where facial recognition and data collection are everywhere?
Those are the questions, right? And that's what's so fascinating about the ECHR. Its legacy is still being written. It's a document that keeps pushing us, challenging us to think critically about this balance, the balance between, individual freedoms on one hand and on the other, what it takes to build a just and democratic society